24 genuine free democracies. What of the remaining 171, or 88% of the world's countries? 59 of them are fully authoritarian, replete with all the horrors such systems entail. Another 20 are chaotic failed states. The remainder are at best a mixed bag, not fully authoritarian, not entirely chaotic, but certainly not thriving democracies. And certainly not the Western countries that the oppressed or predatory of the world flee to, given a choice. What are the cultural preconditions for civil society and good governance? What cultural features characterize the 24 versus the rest, particularly the worst of the rest? 40 of 50, or 80%, of Muslim-majority countries are fully and unabashedly authoritarian. A mere 3 of the remainder are democracies: Morocco, Turkey, and Indonesia, if the definition is allowed to be approximate and generous. The rest are, at best, a mixed bag. And what of majority Protestant or Catholic countries? 100% of these, Africa accepted, and reasonably so, are highly functional free societies. Observation of a track record like that might suggest to a genuinely objective observer a causal connection. Why the stark difference? None of even the possible reasons look good for those who proclaim that the rewards of multiculturalism are untrammeled and certain. First, in the Islamic world, divine law, Sharia, rules. And it is indisputably the case that the more fundamentalist accounts of Sharia, and potentially all accounts, don't mesh easily with the democratic idea of man-made laws subject to change and improvement by consensual and voluntary agreement. For Islamist supremacists, God's law, by their interpretation of course, is regarded as immutable and superordinate to any human legislation. Does this presumption not stand in virtually absolute opposition to a foundational democratic idea, the sovereignty of the people? Some might argue that Shura, the Islamic principle of consultation, is akin to democracy. However, akin to is by no means identical with, and such differences matter in the case of fundamental principles, and they matter a lot. Shura is traditionally a consultation among a select group of Islamic scholars or leaders, and not an electoral process involving universal suffrage. It is therefore not a voluntarily accepted social contract subject to equally voluntary update and change, but a variant form of top-down, elite-imposed governance or tyranny. The historical method of leadership selection in the Islamic world, think of the caliphs, clearly and indisputably reflects this elitism. The same can be said regarding the imams. If such bending of the knee among such people and in such states was truly to the one God, ruling validly forever from on high, something might be still said for it, at least among those who claim religious inspiration. A thorny problem remains, however. The Word of God, according to who? Islamic totalitarianism, which is far too often rule by immature and hedonistic thug, is likewise far too often submission to the thug's interpretation of God. This leaves precisely as much room for disagreement about the divine as thugs might be expected to allow, which is none, or else. The idea that Islam should govern all aspects of life, from personal behavior to state laws, also directly conflicts with the democratic principle of pluralism and freedom to choose. Remember as well, in keeping with all this, that the punishment for rejecting such claims, the price paid for apostasy, is not infrequently death. There is no manner in which any of this self-evidently aligns with the Western principles of freedom of thought, religion, and expression. It therefore seems incumbent on those who believe that such commensurability exists to prove that it does, particularly given the aforementioned statistical difference between Muslim and Christian majority societies, rather than insisting that the burden of proof be put upon the skeptic of the multicultural project. The difference between the societies under consideration, bad as it is in general, is clearly worse for women. Traditional Islamic jurisprudence assigns very different rights and roles to men and women. The typical woman in the authoritarian Muslim countries generally requires a male guardian's permission to marry, travel, or work. Their inheritance share is lesser, typically half. Men can divorce unilaterally with ease, while women cannot. Polygamy is legally allowed in many of the same countries, but polyandry in none. That is by no means all. Women's political participation is severely restricted. Dress codes are frequently or even typically severe. Laws against domestic violence are minimal or absent, and in some cases, marital rape is not recognized or criminalized. Access to education and employment is restricted or absent, and women have limited control over their reproductive choices. The judicial system also operates in ways severely biased against women, with their testimonies often valued at less than men's and their access to justice impeded. If those who inhabit such countries cannot treat their own mothers, wives, and daughters equally, then their track record for tolerating others, including anyone who does not share their attitudes, religious and otherwise, is unlikely to be good. The rape gangs point to this terrible fact. The testimony from the trials indicates a common and obvious disregard, to put it mildly, for the women concerned. Why? Are we to assume that no cultural reasons whatsoever are relevant? Is the possibility that claimed religious belief is involved, however false that claim might be, is simply to be taken off the table? What explanations are then left? The culpability of host society and victim? That seems to be the tack that we have taken. And that's not so good for us, particularly if we're wrong, and certainly does nothing for the young women involved, except blame them and continue to fail in their protection. And there's more with regards to differential vulnerability in relationship to the presumed niceties of the multicultural project. It's an axiom of both psychology and biology that a relationship exists between status or social standing and vulnerability. Animals lower in hierarchical positioning have less opportunity and they suffer more, and exactly the same thing holds for human beings. This means, as the old adage has it, that the working class tends to die of pneumonia when the aristocrats catch cold. This is true even in advanced societies, where the reality of absolute rather than relative poverty has been substantively ameliorated. Poorer is not as terrible as poor, but it still has its marked disadvantages. This means not only that political and cultural elites can flaunt and advertise their admirably open-minded cosmopolitan tolerance while remaining protected from the worst aspects of the policies they facilitated, but that the burden of their self-serving error will fall squarely on the working class, and more specifically on the most vulnerable among them. These would be, as they always have been, unprotected adolescent females. We have not even allowed ourselves to know the full scale of the disaster that has befallen such girls. How many have fallen prey to the depredations of the rapists? Is it 250,000, a half, or the full Monty? How many cumulative acts of rape have occurred? We won't allow ourselves to know within an order of magnitude. And what of those who have fallen victim? Well, first they were raped brutally, then they were pilloried or even arrested for their hypothetically disorderly behavior. Then they were told to remain silent for the sake of a social cohesion that doesn't truly exist, and gaslit when they dared to speak, and all at the hands of those directly charged with their protection. And all the while, the progressives wrung their God-forsaken hands about Islamophobia, that term for cowards, collaborators, and fools, and hate speech, that term for those who hate speech. Actual hate? Manifested in sadistic and racially motivated gang rape? That was fine, as long as nobody talked about it. The message to working class Brits? Know your place and take your punishment. In the most brutal and concrete possible way. The rapes themselves were sickening, brutal, sadistic, low, and criminal. The cover-up, cowardly, hypocritical, and unforgivable.